here for another chapter from Confronting the Past, Book 2 in the King's Information Network series. And we are all the way up to Chapter 12. So let's jump right in. Russ spared no details, except the revelation he'd had while talking to Chris about how much time they actually had. The important thing was that Colin and Soren were here now, and they could make a plan that didn't hinge on Russ's participation. So that about sums it up, he finished, grabbing one of the last pieces of cheese from the meat, cheese, and fruit board Dean had whipped up during the telling. He was freshly amazed at the kid. Somehow he'd eaten more than he had in a couple of days because grazing was easier than focusing on a meal. Colin raised an eyebrow. You call that summing up? Better he be a bit wordy than leave something out, Soren said. Russ had gathered his and Morgan's maps and notes in the den. Soren had them spread out across the coffee table, looking them over. Dean sat next to him on the couch, dividing his attention between his father and the papers. Colin was slumped in one chair, Shannon in the other. Russ had paced through the telling, but now perched himself in the arm of Shannon's chair, hoping he played it well enough that neither Colin nor Soren suspected his primary plan. So, numbers-wise, we're about even. A bit light, but if Rain and her crew join, then yes, Russ confirmed. Soren nodded, pursing his lips thoughtfully. What about in skills? I think Malone's got an edge on us, but we'll have the determination, Shannon answered. A lot of our fighting force are regular people, who only have the most basic skills, while I think Malone's people get more purposeful training as a whole. Russ nodded his agreement, not that Soren needed it. They all knew when to listen to someone with more local or specialized knowledge. Soren tapped the papers. Doable, he said. Shannon, do you know how well guarded Chris's headquarters is? She shook her head. No one dares get anywhere near it these days. I'd guess, but can't be sure of any of the details. Okay, then that needs to be our priority. It's going to boil down to a divergent and simultaneous rescue, unless someone else has a better idea. And to send enough people, we need to know numbers. We'll want as many as possible in the diversion to both make it real and to be able to hold their own without unnecessary loss of life. Colin nodded. Simple yet elegant, and easy to adjust if things go sideways, like if Chris expects us to do this. He glanced at Russ and Shannon. Do we think he will? Probably, Russ said slowly, but I think he'd take the bait regardless. We'll need to prepare as if he'll expect us. So, who's going to do the scouting? This was perfect. I will, Russ said, trying not to sound too eager. Soren frowned. I'm not sure that's the best idea. What if you get caught? I'm not sure Chris would hesitate to kill you. He would, Russ said, meeting Soren's gaze, trying to communicate the importance of him going. How about the only one he wouldn't kill? He could feel Soren's suspicions, but his friend nodded. Very well, you'll go. However, he held up a hand to stop both Shannon and Colin, none of the rest of us in this room can. If something goes wrong, Russ will need us to move quickly. Colin has the respect, and Shannon has the power to be able to put everything into motion as planned. I don't like it, Shannon announced, pulling her hand out of Russ's and folding her arms. It's too dangerous. Shannon, Russ said quietly, and waited till she'd reluctantly turned to look at him. I can do this. I have the training, and if things go badly, Chris won't kill me immediately. He'd kill you, probably even Colin. That doesn't make me feel any better, she snapped, but rubbed the bridge of her nose. You can't go alone. It'd be safer if I did. Mr. Dacamar, she said, turning to him for help, tell Russ he can't go by himself. Russ, don't be stupid, Dean, the Dacamar she wasn't directly addressing, said. If nothing else, if something does go wrong, another person could help, or at least come back and tell us what happened. Shannon eyed the boy with a bit of surprise, but pointed at him and nodded, clearly not about to say no to support. Russ opened his mouth. He didn't want to put anyone else in danger. Colin cut him off now. I know I said this was your operation, Russ, but I'm going to pull rank here. You're not scouting into enemy territory alone. Sending an agent in alone is partially how we ended up here. I'm making new rules as we speak, and that means going nowhere alone. Dean and Colin are right, Soren said, but I think it's fair that you pick who accompany you. Take Paul, Shannon said with a sigh. He's still a kid, but a competent one. He knows what he's doing, and he'll listen to you if I tell him to. Fine, I'll take Paul. Is that good with you two? Russ asked, exasperated. I'd prefer 3, Soren said mildly. Russ gave him the stink eye. Well, Tim could go too. Marg's still too young to send into hostile territory like that, but Tim knows his stuff as well. I'll take them both, on the condition they listen to me, Russ said firmly. Look at you, being all demanding. Is that an old person thing? Dean asked innocently, grinning at Russ from his chair. Shannon looked startled, but Russ couldn't help laughing, some of the tension easing out, despite what he was planning. I'm sorry, Dean, you're right. I need to take it easy. That's why I'm around, the boy agreed, so you and Dad both take it easy sometimes. Russ reached over and ruffled his hair. And you do a good job of it. He took a deep breath. The best time is probably first thing in the morning, since the guilds tend to operate more in the evening. Is that still true, Shan? She nodded. Definitely. That's one rule Malone hasn't broken. He still leaves the regular townsfolk alone and does most of his mischief at night. Can Tim and Paul meet me tomorrow morning, shortly after dawn then? I'll meet them at the fountain. Of course. Shannon hesitated before looking him in the eye. Can we talk in the kitchen? Russ quickly avoided eye contact with Colin, Soren, or Dean. The latter was already snickering while the older two looked highly amused. Doesn't waste any time, does he? Colin asked Soren. I mean, you leave a guy for a day, and bam. I can hear you, Russ muttered, cheeks flaring red. Soren ignored him and nodded. No, he doesn't. Russ likes to capitalize on every available second, he said in solemn agreement. Yes, Shannon, we can talk in the kitchen, Russ said loudly, aiming a glare at the others, which only made Dean burst into outright laughter. You're not setting a good example for your son, he added. I've heard worse, Dean said. It's true, he undoubtedly has, Colin agreed solemnly. Russ sighed, took Shannon's hand, and led her past them. What's up? She turned and kissed him firmly, hands on his cheeks. I don't know what you're planning, but if you go get yourself killed at Malone's hands, I will never forgive you. I don't want to die. Trust me. That was the complete truth. I'll do everything I can to get through this in one piece. Promise me, on Dean's life, that you are telling me the truth. Russ had to smile. I promise you, on Dean's life, that I will do my very best to get through this in one piece. She sighed. Can't someone else go instead? It's bad enough I'm putting Paul and Tim in a dangerous position. I'm not going to trust their safety to anyone but me. Plus, if Chris's men do catch us, I can get them free. It's me he wants, after all. If he gets you, I'll be there kicking that door down within hours. Shannon, he won't kill me. She opened her mouth, eyes narrowing a retort, but he cut her off. No, listen to me. I'm not saying he won't kill me eventually, but he won't kill me soon, even if he catches me. This is Chris, remember? The boy who somehow managed to keep insects alive, even after he'd torn off their wings and legs? That's not making me feel better, Russell Darcy, she snapped. I don't want you to be missing arms and legs if it takes us some time to get to you. It's just an example, he said placatingly. He didn't actually expect Chris to do anything of the kind. New holes? Maybe. Possibly. Likely. And if I do get caught, I'm sure I can get him to release Morgan and Matt, and I can take care of myself. She glared at him. Not funny, Russ. I made you a promise, he said before grinning lopsidedly. I wouldn't want you to be mad at me. Shannon raised an eyebrow. Oh, and why is that? Because then you wouldn't appreciate my breakfasts, he replied innocently. Is that it? You know it's not, he said more seriously. He took her hands. It'll be okay, Shannon. End goal's the same. Stay alive, stop Chris. Soren and Colin know what they're doing. It won't be long now. She studied him. All right, get some sleep tonight, okay? I'll do my best, he told her. Stay safe. He didn't want to lie to her outright. She had to suspect how things might go the next morning. Follow your own advice, Darcy. I will. Good night, Shan. Shannon smiled briefly before leaving Russ standing in the kitchen. He felt a stirring of guilt at not being forthright with the others, but knew Shannon and Colin, in particular, wouldn't let him willingly turn himself over to Chris. But he didn't see another way, despite what he'd said to Chris a few hours earlier. Chris had never been a patient man, and now he was so close to having what he wanted. If anything, Matt and Morgan were in more danger than before, which was a goddamn miscalculation he'd be kicking himself over for a long time. As long as they both stayed alive a little longer, he could help. Some part of him couldn't help wondering if everything Christopher Malone had done in the past 10 years was his way of trying to get Russ back to Greyspire. Snatching Matt and Morgan in such quick succession had to prove it was, didn't it? He sighed. You okay, Russ? Dean asked, appearing in the doorway. He managed to smile. I'm all right, thanks. Been a rough couple of days. Dean nodded, perching on the kitchen table. Yeah, Dad explained the bare bones on our way over here. What Chris did to you and your family, why it was so tough for you to come back. But you know what I think? No. What? He asked, genuinely curious what the astute kid might say. I think you're as strong as Dad, or maybe stronger, and he found the courage and strength to make amends. That's what you're doing now. So you're going to be okay in the end, too. Like Dad. Russ smiled. I'd like nothing more than to end up as okay as your dad. Dean smiled back. You will, he said matter-of-factly. Let's go figure out how we're going to pull off this elaborate diversion of your dad's, all right? Yeah, he might be a planning genius, but he sure seems to miss a lot of things, Dean said innocently. Russ laughed and put his arm around Dean as they headed back to the living room. Russ found himself up well before dawn. They hadn't gone to bed particularly early, but he'd slept dreamlessly. He wasn't at all surprised to find Soren downstairs, reading one of the books from the den by candlelight. Good morning. Soren looked up. Morning, Russ. I was hoping you might sleep later, he said. Hollow hope, I'm afraid. I'm feeling much more rested, though. You look it, but are you sure you're all right and that you're up for this? Unlike you, I can take care of myself, Russ said, smirking, to avoid the serious answer. Soren laughed. I've noticed. Nice to see you and Shannon haven't let any time go to waste. Not funny. You started it, he pointed out mildly. Yeah. Also, you didn't answer my question. Are you really all right? I know you feel responsible for some, if not all of this. I've been there, Russ. You know that. You also know, as I do, that it is not your fault. Matt is. Morgan most likely is. Russell, God's breath, you sound like I did. And you were the one who told me that wasn't correct. We all deserve second chances, Russ. And more importantly, we're all allowed to make mistakes. That's what you said to me the first time I saw you after the Battle of Oak Bridge and expressed my confusion as to why they saved me. You were right. But second chances are for everyone, including you. Cowards don't deserve second chances, Russ mumbled, staring at the painting of his parents. It was amazing how Soren could cut to the core with just a few words and make him admit what he'd been trying to not, immersing himself in the plans instead. Maybe not, but that's completely irrelevant, because you are not a coward. I've been running... Russell Darcy, who the hell are you talking to? Soren demanded. He stammered, not sure where this was going. You? Soren Dagmar? Yes, exactly. Among my many other crimes, I ran for my own son for over 3 years, Russell. You are not a coward. On top of that, I only went back after much prodding by you and Colin, he added. You came back of your own accord. Because I let Colin send Morgan here without proper background, Russ said, although his heart wasn't in the argument anymore. I didn't even know Colin was sending Morgan. I would have told him it was a foolish idea as well. You knew you could help. You came back. That's what counts. Not that you ran in the first place, but that you're prepared to risk your own life to make amends. That's what matters, and anyone you've talked to, besides Chris, would agree, and you know it. There was something knowing in Soren's gaze. He let out a breath. I know, he said finally. I don't want to kill Chris, Soren. No matter what he's done to me in the past, he was my friend. I feel like such an idiot. I know he would kill me if he had his hands on me long enough. But... Soren sighed. I'm still not exactly sure what happened between you and Chris, Russ, but that's your choice. Only you truly know what he's done, and I don't think there's any doubt he'll continue to do it. Russ nodded slowly before getting to his feet. I'm going to make some breakfast. Want anything? Whatever you're making is fine, thanks, Colin said. Breakfast was a relatively quiet affair. Colin wasn't a morning person unless a job required it, and the other three were content with the relative silence of familiarity. By the time Russ left, the three of them were working on a plan of attack. He chuckled to himself as Dean's cheery voice overran the others to point out a flaw in their plan on their way out the door. He quickly made his way to the fountain. The two teens weren't there yet, so Russ paused and dug around in his pocket before pulling out 2 coins. He tossed both in, figuring he'd need all the luck he could get. Hi, Russ, Paul greeted him as he and Tim emerged from the morning's light fog. Hello, Paul. Tim, he said, before pinning them both with a firm look. Okay, here's the deal. I know you both got skills. As you know, I grew up here like you have. But today, there's no questioning orders. You follow mine, and you follow them immediately. We're going deep into an area that's very unsafe, and my goal is to keep both of you safe. That understood? The boys nodded. Yes, sir, Tim added. Good. I'll take point until we get closer. I want you to stay behind me, Paul in the back. If I say run, you get your asses back here immediately. He took a deep breath, checked to make sure they both had their knives within close reach, and headed for Chris's territory. Before anything else, he wanted the boys to get an accurate reading on the information Soren and Colin needed most. How many people directly guarded the headquarters, what time of day might the diversion serve them best, and where he might be holding 2 hostages. They passed without issue into Cal's territory, then reached the boundary between the Masons and the Hostlers. As they approached, Russ stopped, tilting his head to listen as the 2 teens stepped up beside him. They all stood completely still for a solid minute, listening intently for any signs or sounds that someone was patrolling the stretch of boundary. Russ had chosen it because it was smack in the middle of the line dividing the 2 groups. Anything? No, Paul said. Tim shook his head. All right, stick close and keep your ears open, Russ ordered, dredging up all his memories of sneaking around Greyspire as a young teen. Together, they crept down the roads and deeper into Chris's territory. They encountered only light traffic, ducking back into the fog each time. Daytime was for everyday errands, and those people who plied the trades without having a direct force for the guild. Usually, he wouldn't bother hiding, even in another guild's territory during the day, but he trusted no one living in Chris's area for now. Paul hissed a warning, and all 3 froze again, listening hard in the growing fog. Russ motioned them back into the shelter of a ramshackle house as he heard the sound of voices. They crouched there, listening and straining their eyes for a glimpse of the disembodied voices. They grew steadily louder, and then, without Russ being able to spot them, they began to grow more distant. Within a few minutes, the sound had vanished entirely. He motioned them up, and they continued through the streets, Russ striving to remember how to get to the headquarters. He finally paused and glanced back, gesturing for Paul to move up. What is it? Do you know how to get to the Hostler headquarters? Yes. Take the lead and get us there, please. It's been too long, and I'm not sure enough to do it myself. The team nodded. On it. Russell waved Tim forward as well. Stay close to Paul, he ordered as the boy passed. Tim whispered back his agreement and fell in step close behind his friend. Russ stayed back a few feet, listening hard now that he didn't need to concentrate on where he was going. They had 2 more scares than the dozen blocks or so it took to reach Chris's headquarters. Finally, Paul stopped and glanced back. We're here. Can we get up on the wall? Russ asked, coming to crouch beside him. There'll be more people up there. It's harder to get away, depending on how we got up, Paul said, glancing at him. Russ frowned, but had to concede the point. He squinted, able to see the nearby headquarters building only through because of the flickering lanterns attached to intervals cut through the fog. He couldn't see much, though, which wouldn't do as far as their scouting plans went. Russ cursed the fog before turning back to Tim and Paul. I'm going up. Wait here, unless it gets too dangerous, then go back to that last house. Whatever you see, note, and we'll compare what we saw once we get back to Weaver territory. He really wanted that information first. Be careful. He shot Paul a look. Shannon told you to say that, didn't she? The boy grinned briefly, but didn't disagree. If I haven't returned in an hour, start heading back. Do not come after me. Understand? Yes, sir, Tim said, and nudged Paul hard in the side when the other teen didn't say anything. Fine. Yes, we'll go back, he said grudgingly. Good. Russ eyed them for another minute before backtracking and working his way down the side street until he was along the back of the headquarters. Then he slowly started down the street, eyeing the walls, looking for a way up since it looked too smooth to scale. He crept along, continually reminding himself not to hold his breath. His eyes scanned for any sign of movement. There should have been some. The fact there wasn't. As if that thought summoned it, Russ heard the first footfall. Immediately he spun, drawing his knife as he scanned the street behind him. There was no one yet, so he looked for a place to hide. Finding nothing too promising, he darted into the nearest recessed doorway and pressed himself tightly against the wood paneling. That's when he heard the laughter. He knew that sound too well from his childhood. Very well, this had been the expected plan all along. Maybe he'd get lucky and could end this now. Exhaling, he stepped from the building's shadow and faced the direction he'd been headed in, knife held ready at his side. Hello, Chris. The giggling subsided. I never thought you'd come walking right into my hands, Russ. Thought you were too smart for that. Now that it had, Russ wished it hadn't come to this. It was going to hurt, no matter how it played out. Give it a rest, he said, hoping Paul and Tim were safe. I don't think I shall. I do think I'll leave your 2 little accomplices alone, though. It'll be far too much fun watching Shannon and Mr. Lockholm panic over your disappearance. In fact, I think we should guarantee the boys get a show. What do you think, Russell? I think you're going to do whatever you want, as usual, he said calmly, still not able to see Chris yet. There was no question he would be surrounded, though. Good thing he wasn't going to try to escape. Russ. Always playing the hero, aren't you? I knew you'd go off on your own soon enough. It was too easy. What are you doing over here, anyway? Let Chris think what he would about Russ's motives. Making sure I still remember your weak spots, Russ replied. My weak spots? Christopher Malone now materialized out of the fog, odd light eyes flashing. I don't have weak spots, Russell. Of course you do. Everyone does. It's why I've always beaten you in a fight. And it's why you were able to get at me through my parents. You beating me was a fluke, he snapped. Russ shrugged. Think what you like, but I do know them, as does Colin. So when I don't come back, he shrugged again. A knife appeared in Chris's hand, and the man shifted his stance, eyes never leaving Russ's. Let's test that now, shall we? Your men will jump me the moment I win, Russ said with a short laugh. If you win. There's never been a question between us when it comes to that, Chris. Chris bristled and stepped forward. I've been training. And you think I've been sitting around idly? I joined kin. You never used to come close. Now, you sound cocky. Why shouldn't I? You've caught me either way. The other man grinned slowly. Yes, I have. Then he leapt forward. Russ dodged to the side, slashing with his knife, but Chris twisted, dancing out of the way. Russ pressed the advantage and drove forward, but the other man blocked it with his own knife and struck with his fist. Russ managed to slip aside to avoid the blow, knife staying in contact before he ducked out to kick at Chris's legs. Chris grunted as his knee jerked back under the contact before jumping back a few steps and resetting his stance, eyes blazing. He was already panting slightly. Russ stepped back, making an effort to look anything but disturbed by the initial clash. You think you can do it, Chris? Look at you, already winded. The other man growled and charged again. Russ stepped forward this time, shoving the arm holding the blade aside and slamming his shoulder into Chris's chest, using his own momentum against him. He heard the whoosh of air as it was forced out of Chris's lungs. Then he brought his fist in, catching Chris hard in the side. He huffed, but before Russ could hit him again, blood pounding in his ears, he was dragged off Chris and slammed to the ground. Joe, relieve him of this knife, the one standing over him ordered, eyes narrowed. Before Russ could recover his breath, Joe had grabbed his wrist and twisted. He panted, struggling to get free, but a well-placed kick at his side knocked the wind out of him freshly. His fingers released the knife. Joe snatched it up and stepped away, glaring down at him. You okay, boss? Joe asked, glancing at Chris, who held a hand to his stomach, struggling for breath still. Chris nodded, murderous gaze fixed on Russ. Not even a challenge, Russ panted out, daring Chris to respond, even as he started to push himself up. Chris straightened and stalked over. I will kill you, Russell Darcy, he said quietly, and you will pay for all the insults and injuries. Russ laughed. You say that like the number of bruises and injuries I've gotten from you over my lifetime mean nothing. Chris smiled down at him. It was just playing, Russ, he told him, shrugging. So you consider killing my parents just playing, he asked, anger flaring and voice low. No, that was revenge for you hurting me, Chris said, bouncing on his toes. Anger swelled, and Russ scrambled to his feet, intent on killing Chris with his bare hands right then and there. Joe and the other man immediately stepped between them, Joe brandishing the purloined knife. See? Chris said smugly. My people are loyal, because I treat them right. You're fucking insane, Russ hissed, taking a step forward anyway. The nameless one sidestepped and immediately grabbed his arm. Before Russ could shake him off, Joe did the same on his other side, pinning him in place. Insane? Chris asked, smiling. Oh, no, Russ. I'm not insane. I'm perfect, he said, which sounded like something his parents might have told him. He flipped his knife around and around in his hand. Russ tore his gaze from Chris's manic eyes, drawn to the turning knife. So you've led yourself to believe, he said quietly, the anger draining out of him. After all his confident assurances to Dean, Shannon, Colin, and Soren the day before, he wasn't nearly so confident now that Chris wasn't going to plunge that knife straight into his heart and twist. So I know, Chris corrected. I should kill you, Russell. I've been waiting for this moment for over 10 years. One quick action and you're dead. What do you think of that? Kill me if you're going to, Malone, he said flatly, but I don't think you have it in you. Chris giggled. And that's why I'm not going to give in to the temptation, because you want me to do it now if I'm going to do it all, don't you? So I don't think I shall. Plus, there are two people inside who would very much like to see you. Russ let out a mental breath at that, knowing it meant that both Matt and Morgan were still alive. They're a bit damaged at the moment, but that's on them. What do you mean, damaged? Russ asked, feeling the cold anger start to flood back in. Oh, Matthew believed it would be a good idea to inform me of a few things, and he made me mad. Little Morgan thought perhaps she might be able to help. Unfortunately for her, she wasn't able to, he said, back to bouncing in glee. Now, it's time for the boys' show, he added, positively beaming. You don't seem nearly injured enough, though. Russ couldn't resist smirking. That's because I beat you, Chris, like I do every time. Chris took 2 steps forward and jammed the knife into Russ's left shoulder to the hilt and then twisted. Russ cried out in pain, trying to pull back, feeling almost immediately lightheaded. After a few seconds that felt at least 10 times longer, Chris slowly pulled the knife back out and held it up between them as it dripped with Russ's blood. Well, would you look at that, he giggled before wiping it off on Russ's shirt and sheathing it again. You bleed quite nicely. I'm as human as the next man, Russ gritted out, trying to ignore that he had to be gushing blood. I remember. You always bruised so nicely, Chris said, before pulling back his fist and punching Russ hard in the face. Before Russ could begin to recover, he brought his other fist in and connected firmly with the new wound. Pain shot straight to Russ's head, and he was sure he cried out again before everything went blissfully dark.